you're upset that I accidentally gave you an extreme encounter without letting you rest first. I think that's a completely understandable mistake. Today, we're going to talk about encounter building in Pathfinder 2e on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who should probably learn how to better calculate the experience budget of swarms at my gaming table. My players would appreciate that. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today we are continuing our storytelling in Pathfinder 2e series, and we're going to be talking about encounter building in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. The Storytelling in Pathfinder 2e series is a look at the tips, tricks, and advice that Paizo gives storytellers to help us have success with our Pathfinder 2e games, and this series is intended for storytellers of all skill levels, from beginner to advanced, and even if your main game is something other than Pathfinder, I invite you to be part of the conversation. I have found as a storyteller that in studying a number of different games, I often learn cool ideas and cool tips that I can bring back to my favorite game to improve the experience that I'm having with my players. So, as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about encounter building, and I need to give a shout out to my patrons today. You can check out my Patreon, linked in the video description below. But a few weeks ago, when I realized that there was going to be a massive delay on my copy of Secrets of Magic, I reached out to my patrons and asked them what kind of videos they would like to see to kind of fill the extra time that I have this month. And one of the suggestions that was made was to do a video on encounter building in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So this video today is actually brought to you by the suggestions of my patrons. So to all of my patrons, thank you so much. I appreciate your support. Feel free to check out my Patreon, and I've also got a link to my free Discord page down in the video description. And I guess, since I'm already doing YouTube stuff, let me go ahead and encourage you to like the video and share it if you enjoy it. Definitely subscribe to the channel for more conversations about RPGs. And most importantly, I always invite you to be a part of the conversation. Leave your thoughts, leave your comments, give me feedback. I love the conversations that we're having, and we have a fantastic community here, so I appreciate hearing from you guys and learning from the thoughts you have about gaming and storytelling. So, some context for this video. We are in a series where we're looking at the 3 modes of play in Pathfinder 2e: Encounter Mode, Exploration Mode, and Downtime Mode. Last week we did a video that took a big picture narrative look at the purpose of the different modes of play in Pathfinder 2e. So if you're interested in that video, I'll throw a link up here. But the time has come to dive into each mode of play in specific and examine the different issues that go into running each mode of play and how to run each mode of play successfully. Now, all 3 modes of play have a lot of complexity, and it would be impossible to cover every single topic for encounter mode in a single video. So I'm going to be breaking this up into chunks, and today's video, as I said, is on the subject of encounter building. This video may be a little bit more limited than normal, but since we're going to be talking a lot about the math behind encounter building, I don't want to make the conversation too broad. I want to keep it focused so we can make sure we're getting the key ideas that we need to know. However, there are definitely some resources that you can use if you want to learn more about the different modes of play and the specific rules that go into the different modes of play. In particular today, the encounter building rules that I'm going to be using come from the core rulebook, pages 488 and 489. In particular, we're going to be referencing a couple of tables that are found on those pages. I'll try to find some pictures of those tables I can share in this video, though to be honest, frequently the pictures I find are very low quality, so we'll see if I can find some good ones for this video, but you can find them in the core rulebook, and Paizo has done a good job. The particular tables I'm going to reference that are kind of quick reference tables for Game Masters can be found on the Game Master screens. This is the regular Game Master screen, and as you can see, I have the Advanced Game Master screen behind me. Both of these Game Master screens are going to contain those quick reference tables, so they are excellent resources if you're trying to pull something together quickly during the course of play. Also, I'd just like to give a shout out to my friend Dave from the YouTube channel How It's Played. He has a lot of videos that dive into specific rules inside of Pathfinder 2e. So if you're looking for a deeper understanding of specific rule sets, I strongly encourage you to check him out. He also usually has examples to help highlight whatever it is he's talking about in his videos. So if you're trying to learn some more, he can be a great resource as well. But it's time to build some encounters, so let's get started. Okay, so when we talk about encounter building in Pathfinder 2e, there is another rule set that we need to be familiar with in order to successfully understand the system and the structure that Paizo has put in place. And that rule set is experience points. And here's where I need to be honest. I'm one of those game masters that hasn't used experience points for a very long time. In a lot of TTRPGs, XP tables and figuring out XP progression is just a lot of headache and a lot of homework, and so for a long time I've been one of those storytellers who just kind of hand waves it. You know, you guys have gone through several story points and you've beaten several monsters. I think you're ready to level up. In fact, in a lot of TTRPGs, experience points and encounter building are almost two separate mechanics. You build the encounter, and then after you build the encounter, you determine how much experience that encounter is worth. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, though, Paizo took a different and very interesting approach. In Pathfinder 2e, you actually determine how much XP you want and use that to build the encounter. The XP comes first, the encounter is built, and then when the encounter is over, you give that amount of XP to your players. I'm not going to lie, this is one of those subtle things that Paizo did that really makes me appreciate Pathfinder 2e. It is such a small change, but it is such a brilliant change, and it is something I genuinely appreciate. So really quick, in Pathfinder 2e, players need 1,000 experience points to level up. And it doesn't matter which level you're talking about. Level 1 to level 2, 1,000 XP. Level 19 to level 20, again, 1,000 XP. Your players are on a constant quest to generate 1,000 experience in order to get to the next level of proficiency for their characters. Paizo put that steady baseline into the game and then created an encounter building system where you just say, I want this encounter to be worth 80 experience, or I want this encounter to be worth 120 experience, and then it gives you the tools to make encounters that grant that much experience. So let's say that my players have 880 experience. Well, then I know that 120 experience is going to get them to the next level. And, by the way, that corresponds to what's known as a severe encounter in Pathfinder 2e, which is also a boss fight. It's very clean, it's very precise, the math on this is very neat, and this is the first time in a long time that I've actually found myself using XP rules in an RPG, because not only are they easy, but they're actually useful, and I can figure out exactly what I'm aiming for. So the first step in building an encounter in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is literally asking yourself, how much experience do I want this particular encounter to be worth? And I know I've said it before, but I want to emphasize this. Whatever amount of experience you want this to be worth, that's what it's going to be worth when your players complete the encounter. If it is a 80 experience encounter, then when your players overcome that challenge, that is exactly how much experience you will be giving them. Once you know how much XP you want to give them and build the encounter with, it then becomes a question of how do we plug monsters and other challenges into the encounter in order to build up to that level of experience. Now, before we dive into the specific math, we want to go ahead and address the different encounter levels that Paizo describes for storytellers to use. Paizo gives us 5 levels of encounter, although it is important to note that Paizo really only intends for us to use 4 of those levels with any regularity. The levels are trivial, low, moderate, severe, and extreme. Paizo defines a trivial encounter as an encounter that is so easy that your party is not going to expend any significant resources in overcoming that encounter. They may take a minor amount of damage, they may be delayed for a short period of time, but the threat to the party is, well, in the title, it's trivial. The next step up is low threat encounters. Low threat encounters are encounters that the party should have a very clean chance of winning, but the encounter will probably require them to have some minor expenditure of their resources. So these are the sorts of encounters where you're going to see more spells begin to be used, where you're going to see focus points being burned. Your players are going to have a noticeable advantage, but it's going to be a little bit harder for them to overcome. However, a low threat encounter is still one of those things where, unless your players are just making terrible choices at the gaming table, they should have a pretty clean win. The next step up is moderate encounters, and I will say that I wish they had chosen a different term than moderate, because moderate feels vague for what they're trying to express here. A moderate encounter, according to the core rulebook, is a serious encounter. This is an encounter where your players should probably take some noticeable damage. This is an encounter where your players are probably going to burn some important resources, and after the encounter is over, your players very likely may need to have a rest before they continue their adventure. It's worth noting that the phrase moderate encounter in Pathfinder 2e is listed as the equivalent to a minor boss. Usually I would not associate the words mini-boss and moderate as being the same level of encounter, but that is how Pathfinder 2e has designed this system. So, storytellers, be aware. Next up is the severe encounter, and the severe encounter is very clearly labeled as the boss fight. There is a severe threat to party members. If they don't play smart, they might lose someone. There is a very real threat to your players, and you are throwing a severe challenge at them. In normal play, severe encounters are probably as high as you're going to go. The final level of encounter is extreme encounters. Extreme encounters are the TPK potential fights. These are the encounters that very easily and very quickly can overwhelm your players and leave them figuring out what they're going to be rolling up next. Extreme encounters are the kind of situation where your players either need a very solid advantage or you're aiming for a major crisis point in your story. Extreme encounters are not regular play. They are very special moments inside of the game. Okay, so now that we've talked about the 5 levels of encounter, trivial, low, moderate, severe, and extreme, let me give you a trivia question. This is a skeletal giant. It is a level 3 creature in Pathfinder 2nd edition. Let's assume for a moment that you have a level 3 adventuring party. Level 3 party, level 3 creature. Okay? How many skeletal giants can you throw at your party if you want a moderate encounter? How many level 3 giants can you throw at your party if you want a severe encounter? And how many level 3 giants can you throw at your party if you want an extreme encounter? Think about it for a second. Alright, so you've got a level 3 adventuring party, and you're wanting to use some skeletal giants, a level 3 creature. If you wanted some skeletal giants and you wanted to make it a moderate encounter, which we've already established is a serious fight. It could potentially serve as a mini-boss for your party. There is a chance that your party is going to need to rest after they get done with the fight. If you wanted to use skeletal giants for a moderate encounter against a level 3 party, you would use 2 skeletal giants. Does that shock you? When I first started playing Pathfinder 2e, I was coming from a 1e encounter building mindset, and frequently in Pathfinder 1st Edition, on-level creatures were a little bit better than speed bumps against my players. So if I was playing Pathfinder 1e and I had a level 3 party, I would probably throw them against 4 skeletal giants and just assume that that was going to be an easy encounter for them. That's not the case in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, just 2 on-level creatures is considered a moderate threat encounter for your standard 4-person adventuring party. By the way, 3 on-level creatures is considered a severe encounter, and 4 on-level creatures is considered an extreme encounter. In other words, what I used to routinely do in Pathfinder 1e is now TPK potential in Pathfinder 2e. Game Masters, take note. Dropping too many on-level creatures on your party can very quickly overwhelm them. Alright, so let's talk numbers. By the way, these numbers can be found on tables 10.1 and tables 10.2 in the Pathfinder Core Rulebook, and as I previously mentioned, these are available on the Game Master screens. When you're trying to build an encounter, what you want to do is you want to determine how much experience that encounter is worth. And Paizo gives us a scale. A trivial encounter should have approximately 40 experience in value. A low-threat encounter should have approximately 60 experience and value. A moderate threat encounter should have approximately 80 experience and value. A severe threat encounter should have approximately 120 experience and value. And then an extreme threat encounter should have around 160 XP value. That is the baseline that you're working with. By the way, it's important to note here that these are guidelines. You don't have to stick specifically to these numbers, but just be aware that these are the generalizations that Paizo has given us. So if you wanted to do a trivial encounter, it's okay if you end up with 45 experience as the budget for that encounter. You can go over by 5 XP, that's not a problem. Just know that around 40 experience is around the level that Paizo intends for trivial encounters. By the same token, between 80 and 120, you are moving between moderate and severe. A 90 XP encounter is probably going to be closer to a moderate threat, while a 110 XP encounter is going to be closer to a severe threat. Look at these budgets as guidelines, not hard rules that you have to stick to when you are encounter building. Once you have the budget for your encounter, the next thing you need to do is just slot in the challenges that are going to be part of that encounter. So let's say you're doing a moderate threat encounter. You have 80 experience in budget that you can use to build that particular encounter. From there, you just have to know how much experience hazards and creatures are going to be worth. Now, I'll go ahead and say that hazards are almost an entire separate conversation, because when you get into hazards, you get into simple hazards and complex hazards. So for now, we're just going to talk about creatures. If you would like me to come back and do a hazard-specific video, I can do that. It's definitely one of the topics that would be relevant to encounter building, but today we're just going to talk about creatures. Earlier, when we started talking about creatures, one of the things that we noted is that every creature comes with a level. For example, this skeletal giant is a level 3 creature. So when you're determining the XP value of a skeletal giant, what you want to do is you want to compare the creature level 3 to the level of your party. That comparison between those two numbers is going to determine the XP budget of that creature. So, an on-level creature has an XP budget of 40. That's the reason that 2 on-level creatures is a moderate threat in Pathfinder 2e. Each creature is worth 40 XP. A moderate threat encounter is 80 XP in total budget, so 2 creatures equals a moderate threat for your Pathfinder 2nd edition party, assuming you're using on-level creatures. Now obviously you can send your players up against creatures that are higher level than them or lower level than them, and it's worth noting that in Pathfinder 2e, for encounter budgeting purposes, they assume that your party is going to be going up against creatures within 4 levels of the party. So the tables that I referenced, they're going to give you the XP value of creatures that are on level, and then creatures that are 1 to 4 levels lower than the party, as well as creatures that are 1 to 4 levels higher than the party. As the relative level changes, the XP budget of the creature changes as well. A creature 1 level lower than the party is worth 30 experience, meaning that our skeletal giant friend against a level 4 party would only be worth 30 XP when you're doing encounter budgets. Creatures that are 2 levels lower are only worth 20 XP on an encounter budget, so against a 5th level party, this becomes a 20 XP monster. By the same token, a monster that is 2 levels higher than the party is worth 80 experience, meaning that a level 1 party fighting a single skeletal giant is going to be in a moderate threat encounter with just that one enemy. And that's really the basics of encounter building. Figure out how much XP the fight needs to be worth, and then compare the level of the creatures that you want to use against the level of your party. Depending upon the XP value of the creature, you might only have 1 creature, or you might need to insert several into the fight, but basically that's the core of the math. However, there are a few other issues I think we need to address. First, I want to go ahead and note that the assumptions on encounter building in Pathfinder 2e assume that all of your players are the same level. The math that I just described doesn't work if you have a party where everyone is at different levels. So if you have a level 4 player, 2 level 3 players, and a level 2 player, the math would not be the same as what I just described. Realize that the encounter budgets that we've been discussing assume that everyone in your party is the same level. Also, another assumption that is relatively common to TTRPGs, but it still is important to keep in mind, is these encounter building rules assume that you have a party of 4 adventurers. Many gaming groups may have more than 4 people in the party, or may have less than 4 people in the party. It is worth noting that the encounter building tables that I've been talking about, they have a character adjustment column that you can use to adjust for a different number of people in your party. For example, on this table, a moderate encounter is adjusted by 20 experience for each player that is extra or missing from your 4-player party. So if you want to run a moderate threat encounter for a 5-player party, you actually have 100 XP in budget for your players. By the same token, if you only have a 3-player party, you would have 60 XP to build a moderate threat encounter. Now, it is important to note that character adjustment XP does not impact the actual rewarded XP. If you're aiming for 80 XP in rewards, the character adjustment XP is going to let you put more or fewer monsters in that encounter as appropriate, but at the end of the encounter, you're still going to hand out the original 80 XP that you were aiming for. So just be aware that if you have a larger or smaller group, that is an adjustment you'll need to make. The last minor thing that I want to point out here is higher level monsters very quickly become solo monsters in this game. I already pointed out, 2 creatures at the party level is a moderate threat encounter. So for a standard party of 4, that's 2 creatures against 4 equals moderate threat. You can see how that would very quickly become for a severe, or heaven help the poor party, extreme encounter, how it could very easily become 1 monster versus 4 players. Monsters that are a higher level than your party are probably going to be solo encounters. If you want multiple monsters, then you need to aim for lower level monsters. If you have a level 3 party and you want to put a lot of monsters in the fight, you probably need to be looking at level 2, maybe even level 1 monsters, so that you have the XP budget to allow for that. And the last thing that I want to point out here, we've already talked about, but I think this is worth reiterating, and that is that moderate threat encounters can be used as a mini-boss in effect, and one of the assumptions of the game is that your party will have a very real need to rest after a moderate threat encounter. In other words, as a storyteller, if you want to create a scenario where your party is going to go from encounter to encounter to encounter to encounter in very rapid succession, you probably should be using trivial and low threat encounters for that kind of scenario. Having several moderate encounters just back to back with one another is a very easy way to put your players in a frustrating situation inside of the game. So that's a look at the math on encounter building. You start with the XP that you want to reward your players, use that to create an encounter budget, figure out the value of the creatures and hazards that you want to use in that encounter, and just add up the creatures and hazards until you reach the level of XP that you need. The amount of XP that creatures and hazards reward is going to be based on their level as compared to the party level, and as a general rule, the game assumes that your players should be encountering creatures and hazards either on level with the party or within 4 levels of the party, that being 4 levels above or below the party's actual level. And again, all of these rules assume that you have a standard adventuring party of 4 players who are all the same level. If your players are at different character levels, or if you have more or fewer players than the standard 4-person adventuring party, you will have to make some adjustments in the encounter budget. But whatever the adjustments may be to your encounter budget, remember that those adjustments will not modify the original amount of XP that you intended to reward. But that was a very quick look at how to build encounters in Pathfinder 2e. Let me turn the conversation over to you. Do you have any questions about the math behind building encounters in Pathfinder 2e? Or do you have any tips or tricks that you have found useful when you want to build encounters in Pathfinder 2e? Let me know in the comments down below. As I said earlier, leave a like or share the video if you enjoyed it, and do all of that other YouTube stuff if you want to be a part of the Disaster Tour Guide community. I thank you so much for being part of the conversation, and have a wonderful day.